Hello and welcome to tonight's edition of Resistance TV. This evening we're going to be looking at the implications of the legal battle that was joined by Labour activists to force the Labour Party to treat its members fairly and show them some respect. But after securing several victories along the way, sadly they fell at the final hurdle in the High Court last month. Although the hearing was in June, the judgment wasn't handed down until last week. And at a separate hearing on Monday, the activists were hit by a potentially ruinous legal bill after the judge agreed to the Labour Party's demand that the activists pay the party's legal costs. Furthermore, this judge has essentially ruled that the Labour Party can now abuse its members with impunity. Joining us to discuss the fallout from this case are socialist commentator and former Labour Party activist Ammar Kazmi and councillor Ayfer Orhan, who was one of the claimants who successfully challenged her suspension, forcing the party to capitulate before the High Court hearing took place. We're having a few technical difficulties in reaching Ayfer this evening, though, so I'm hoping that we will be able to hear from her, but we'll see how we get on a little bit later on in the programme. But first, let me start the discussion tonight by asking you, Ammar, to briefly explain the background to this case and provide a bit more detail about what the activists were trying to achieve.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, I think that was a very succinct opening. I don't really know if I need to necessarily go into too much of the sort of general background. Of course, there were 8 Labour activists. In the end, they brought a case against the party, essentially saying that they'd suffered unfair disciplinary action. That case has been actually going on now for, well, it went on for well over half a year. It started in its sort of embryonic stage in about December last year. And since that time, the claimants managed to achieve a number of substantial victories. And, obviously it was a party, as you say, that disappointingly won that sort of last leg of the process. So perhaps it would just be helpful for me to explain what some of the arguments were, what was achieved, what was lost. So the claimants had set out essentially to achieve 3 outcomes. They wanted, firstly, to ensure that the party adhered to the principles of natural justice and procedural fairness in the way that their cases were handled. That's a requirement in the Labour Party rule book. So it was essentially a breach of contract claim because the Labour Party is an unincorporated association. What that means is that all of the party members are sort of bound together by contract, and it's the rule book that binds them all together. Secondly, they wanted the party to respond to the findings of unfairness contained in last year's EHRC report on anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, because whilst we heard a lot about the EHRC's findings with respect to complainants, as in the people who bring complaints against other people, the EHRC report did actually contain a number of findings about respondents, the people who have to answer the allegations that are made against them. And the EHRC found that actually it wasn't just complainants who were subject to different unfairnesses, it was actually also respondents as well. So they wanted the party to comply with what the EHRC had said. And thirdly, they wanted the party to stop giving the impression that party members are under stricter confidentiality requirements than they actually are. So that was essentially the 3 outcomes they were looking for. Now, in terms of the substance, since 2018 and until recently, the party had been applying an unpublished, secret anti-Semitism code of conduct to disciplinary cases. And the claimant said, well, look, if Labour members are accused of misconduct, then, surely it's right that they should know what criteria apply to them. There shouldn't be secret codes of conduct that they don't know about, to which they are being, held accountable. But unfortunately, the court agreed with the party's view that the claimants only needed to know, quote, the gist of the material that was being used against them. The claimants also said, well, the party is continuing to use disciplinary processes that the EHRC found to be unfair. They found them to be unfair at the end of October last year. So we're now approaching about 9 months since Keir Starmer went on national TV, and I think we all saw those images of him making very clear promises to not just party members, but the country as a whole, that he accepted the EHRC report and that he would be overseeing very swift changes. That hasn't happened. Nevertheless, the court basically accepted the party's arguments that the EHRC apparently didn't find that Labour's processes were fundamentally unfair. Now, on that particular point, I think that really needs to be exposed. You know, we have the party saying one thing in public, that they accept the report, in Sir Keir Starmer's words, in full and without qualification. And in court, they're saying another thing entirely. Now, let's bear in mind, you know, these are the same processes and rules being used now that were used under Jeremy Corbyn, which supposedly resulted in unlawful indirect discrimination and harassment, according to the EHRC. But under Starmer, they're now magically fit for purpose. And lastly, the claimant said, you know, that the party's confidentiality requirements caused them real harm. They felt unable, or some of them felt unable, to tell people that they were under investigation, unable to respond to public accusations against them, and so on. But again, the court agreed with the party that there hadn't been any unfairness in that respect, and that even if there had been unfairness, the court wouldn't have intervened because it didn't want to micromanage a political party, which in my view really says it all. You know, I think sadly there was bad luck when it came to the judge, who seemed to be following a policy of judicial restraint or judicial hesitance, one might call it. You know, so with a different judge, with a different judicial philosophy, perhaps the judge that was in your case, Chris, you know, if they had that judge, then it might well have gone the other way. So that's basically what happened. Those were the defeats. In terms of the achievements, well, this High Court judgment, as I said right at the beginning, is only the sort of the last leg of the process. So, you know, one thing that the claimants can take credit for is that as a direct result of this case, Labour finally published that anti-Semitism code of conduct that I mentioned, basically at the end of March this year, and that can now be found in a brand new complaints handling handbook, which actually goes, you know, far more extensively than that code of conduct, and it also outlines sort of issues in respect of free speech that members can rely on. So that was a very big victory. And astonishingly, actually, the party admitted in open court that it refused to previously publish that document, which was a Corbyn-era document. As I say, it was from 2018. It was one of the things that came in under Jenny Formby's watch, because it would have been politically incendiary. That was their reason for essentially saying that, well, party members, you can't see what standards are being used against you, because if we were to publish this, then that would cause us political problems. And actually, I also saw a tweet in June that was from the NEC member Mish Rahman, one of the sort of left-wing CLP NEC members, saying that the NEC was in the middle of creating a new code of conduct specifically on confidentiality and privacy. And I think, again, that's highly likely to have been a direct response to the claimant's arguments on confidentiality. And on that point, this case has clarified that members who are subject to disciplinary action are entitled to speak about their cases. You know, you will have received, Chris, a notice of investigation. I received a notice of investigation in 2016. Anyone who's been subject to the party's McCarthyite processes has had one of these letters, and you'll know that it comes with, you know, quite threatening language, in my view, about confidentiality. It makes it appear as if you're gagged, that you can't tell people what's happening with you, and that essentially if you were to say anything about what's happening in your case, then that could result in further disciplinary action taken against you. But the party has essentially conceded that's not the case. You know, you can tell people about what's happening to you. You can divulge any information that relates to you personally, because that's your own personal data. And it's shocking, actually, that it took a literal trial in the High Court for that to have been clarified. And, you know, but it still hasn't been widely reported. It's not like the party has gone out and told people this is what's happening. But, you know, perhaps we'll see that in this code of conduct. But the biggest victory of all, Chris, was that whilst there were originally 13 potential claimants, the party preemptively backed down by reinstating 5 of them without any preconditions. And that was before they even reached court. So, you know, there were a lot of positive results that came from this claim. But obviously, despite those victories, you know, there was still this last leg of the process that went bad for the claimants and has resulted in this cost order. And I think it's extremely clear now that actually the Labour Party has become a law unto itself. It can basically do whatever it wants. And, you know, but even so, I think it was very important to bring this case. And I think it's clarified a lot of issues, and it's highlighted in explicit detail sort of the broken nature of the Labour Party. Oh, I can't hear you, Chris. Not sure why.
I think it's because I muted myself. Yeah, which is a very bad faux pas. I'm supposed to be hosting things. Yeah. No, I was saying you've sort of answered, I think, the next question I was going to put to you. But just before I do that, I think one of the significant achievements is definitely the confidentiality point that you made, because certainly when I was suspended, and indeed on advice from my own lawyers, whilst I was being introduced in the media, being briefed against by the Labour Party's bureaucrats, and indeed being attacked by the vast majority of the parliamentary Labour Party, I was under these strictures whereby I wasn't able to defend myself. And indeed, when I was reinstated and John McDonnell suggested, after there was a move by over 100 MPs and 50 odd members of the House of Lords to withdraw the whip from me for a year, a motion was going to go to the next parliamentary Labour Party meeting. But that was then preempted because Jenny Formby decided to re-suspend me, which was the point of the High Court hearing. But John's suggestion was that I should apologise again and again, and go and see the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council and offer to meet any MPs that were hurt or distressed by my comments, which clearly they weren't really hurt or distressed by them. It was all a ruse. But these people were egregious in their attacks against me. And I was unable to defend myself. And I said to John that, look, I'm not going to apologise. You really need to go and to the media and defend me. But unfortunately, John wasn't prepared to do that, nor was any other member of the Socialist Campaign Group to speak out publicly. But the point I was just going to make, though, actually, Ammar, I think you've sort of slightly answered it, but I think it's just worth putting it again, if I may, because there's been only a little bit, it's not been huge, but there have been a few comments, albeit on social media, critical comments, saying that, as political activists, we shouldn't be seeking a remedy in the courts, the establishment's courts. That isn't the right way to go. It was, a waste of time. What would your response be to that? Do you think, obviously you've sort of answered that really, but just to sort of directly deal with that criticism head on, what would be your response?
Well, of course, as we know, it wasn't a waste of time. There were numerous victories that came from it. But I think that at the end of the day, the courts are the last recourse. I think, if you can't hold the party to account and the party's procedures, the party's bureaucrats to account internally, then what other recourse do you have? Essentially, they're saying that you shouldn't be able to have any recourse. You should just be able to deal with it politically. But that's simply not the case. You can only really do that if a party is truly democratic and accountable. And if the Labour Party were truly democratic and accountable, then of course we would be saying to party members that you should absolutely exhaust all of the processes available to you and all of the appeals and options there. But that isn't how the party works. The party's procedures are very arbitrary, very unfair. And, again, as I say, there were numerous, I think, common sense findings in the EHRC report last year, despite all the criticisms that I have made of it, and there were many, but I think there were numerous common sense findings that even they couldn't ignore of unfairnesses against respondents. So the party's processes are endemically sort of broken. And so where else can you turn? Now, some people say, well, as I say, it's just a political matter. It shouldn't be intervened by the courts. But I think that's really looking at it in the wrong way. The sort of system that we have in the UK means that there are essentially two major political parties. If you want to be involved in sort of, right-wing politics in the UK, if you want to exercise your democratic rights, you basically have to be a member of the Conservative Party, or you have to go through it, you have to be associated with it. Of course, there are other avenues, but then you'll be sort of in the minority. And it's the exact same on the left. If you want to be sort of active on the mainstream left of British politics, then you kind of have to be in the Labour Party or associated with it or have some relationship to it. And so surely that means that one's membership of those political parties ought to be sacrosanct, ought to be protected. You should only really be able to be excluded from those organizations because of some very, very serious violation. Otherwise, you're essentially attacking people's democratic and political rights. That's what it is. It's not just a case of which is the way that the court would see it, that these are sort of just membership clubs, the same as sort of a bowling club or a golf club. And, you can be a member of it if you pay your dues and whatever. But if the members in that sort of organization or the leadership of that organization wants to throw you out, they should feel free to do so. That's not the same as a political party, I'm afraid. It's not the same, particularly, as I say, because of the first past the post system and because we have two dominant parties. So actually, one's membership if they want to have it, of the Conservative Party or the Labour Party really ought to be seen as sort of a democratic right in that way, and not just necessarily because of those two parties. If there were two other dominant parties, the same argument would be made. And the only way that we would really be able to get away from that is if we reform the entire political system and we ensure that actually there were adequate spaces for minority voices to be involved in politics. But that's not how our political system works. So if that's not how our political system works, then of course people should be able to resort to other measures to ensure that their party membership, if they want it, is secured and that they're treated fairly. So I don't accept that criticism even one bit, I'm afraid.
Well, listen, let me bring in Ayfer now. Let's hope we've managed to sort out the technical difficulties with the audio and video. We can see Ayfer now. I hope she can hear me okay. Ayfer, you were obviously one of the claimants who successfully challenged the party and were reinstated. But I wondered if you could perhaps just tell the viewers about your suspension and basically the impact that it had on you personally, because I know a lot of people it's had a profound impact on their physical health, on their mental health. And I just wondered how it impacted on you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me to the programme and giving me this opportunity to speak up. Because actually, since my suspension in March 2019, and following an email letter that I received from the Labour Party after a huge amount of damage was done to my name, my reputation, and my standing within my community, my home, my family, and in the wider community internationally, because I was well known, and so following that, a day later or 2 days later, I received this email from the Labour Party clarifying that I wasn't able to speak, and clarifying that I hadn't been suspended. So I think, and this is the first opportunity, or the second opportunity rather. The first one was the opportunity to have my case presented to the preliminary of the court action, and the second opportunity is this, to say a few words about the fact that I was gagged. I felt I was gagged, and I couldn't speak up at the time because of this, as I said, letter that came to me a couple of days later, after Councillor Chalishkan had made a number of falsehoods in the national and local media about the fact that I had been suspended, which in fact was untrue, because I hadn't been suspended, and actually did a lot of damage and caused me a lot of pain and stress for over 2 years.
You were under investigation, I think. Is that right, Ayfer? They put you under formal investigation. Was
the
that
letter? The letter is really the letter that came from the Labour Party was rather strange. The first letter that came on the 29th of March, which I said a few days after Councillor Chalishkan, the leader of Enfield Council, made those falsehoods in the national and local papers about me, was said this, actually, Chris. And if you wouldn't mind, I'll read
no,
you.
Of course.
The first letter from the Labour Party, as I said, issued on the 29th of March 2019, said, "We are currently at the investigatory stage of the disputes process, and at no time during an investigation does the Labour Party confer an assumption of guilt on any party. You are not currently administratively suspended. No restrictions have been placed on the rights associated with your membership at this time." And then, Chris, it goes on to say, "The Labour Party's investigation process operates confidentially. That is vital to ensure fairness to you and the complainant." I'm yet to hear who the complainant was, "and to protect the rights of all concerned under the Data Protection Act 2018. I must therefore," and this is the line, this is a crucial line that convinced me I couldn't say anything in the public domain, and I couldn't dispute what Councillor Chalishkan had said about me. "I must therefore ask you to ensure that you keep all information and correspondence relating to this investigation private, and that do not share it with third parties." Grammar is really bad, I've copied it direct. "And that do not share with third parties or the media, including social media. So that was really, really strange situation to find myself in. Over 20 years as a councillor in the London Borough of Enfield, and like most people, historical data going back to over 40 years of campaigning and supporting the Labour Party, parliamentary candidate twice for the Labour Party. So they obviously think I'm good character, put me as a parliamentary candidate or allowed me to go through the selection process as a parliamentary candidate. And yet a single tweet I did on the 22nd of March 2019, a single tweet in my entire life was questioning the awarding of contract to Genie Energy and to drill for oil in the Golan Heights. Now, I'm an environmentalist, but also a councillor, and councillors by their very nature are inquisitive animals, and we ask questions. That's what we train to do. So I asked the question, horrific if this is true, and then sent it off to the big wide web, but and thought nothing of it. I was asked a question in order to learn what that was all about. I didn't name any names. I didn't question any political parties. I didn't question any political or non-political communities. So I sent it off, and my tweet actually, my site, my profile says that I don't endorse anything, that I retweet, assuming that would protect me.
Yeah.
Actually, quite honestly, I was rather innocent and naive, having built this really, I thought, solid reputation, a single mum, protecting my name for my children's sake. And I thought that I'm not ordinary human being like every other listener, every other person in the Labour Party, wanting to do the right thing and asking the right questions. And if someone like me, that hasn't been, I was active in the 80s and 90s and earlier with a miners' strike and various other big campaigns, very much an anti-apartheid campaigner in my early days as a young woman, and so what I felt was I did the right thing in my life, campaigned, fought against the right battles, and yet approaching 60 plus, and I came across this thing in my life which actually, Chris, has devastated me. Look, I'm still emotionally raw from it.
I can say that.
Completely devastated me, and it knocked me back for 6. And for 2 years the Labour Party maintained a shroud of silence, despite the fact that they said they were investigating a single tweet. It took them over 2 years, and if it hadn't been for the Legal Fighting Fund and those wonderful people who took my case on, I would still be sitting and waiting for a judgment from the Labour Party.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
No, it's shocking. It's truly shocking. Thank you for telling us your story, Ayfer. It's I know it's difficult sometimes to speak about these things. I know I've been personally affected. Obviously, gone through a similar process to yourself. And when you spent such a long time devoting your spare time, your energies to the Labour Party, it kind of feels part of the family. And it feels like, to me anyway, it felt like a bereavement. I mean, the only thing that I can compare it to is when my wife died. Frankly, I know it might sound a bit extreme, but it really was that bad. It affected me very, very badly for a number of weeks. And I was only able to get through it, frankly, thanks to the incredible outpouring of solidarity from comrades up and down the country. It was truly, truly heartwarming, I've got to say. And I was moved to tears by more than a few occasions by some of the wonderfully kind, beautiful, heartfelt solidarity and love, actually, I've got to say, that was directed towards me, and that really did help me get through it. But I mean, obviously, you were reinstated, Ayfer. I mean, I think you've resigned from the Labour Party, have you now? I mean, just tell me about that. I mean, what's your position now in regards to the party and going forward?
Yes, well, I must first of all say that I'm genuinely grateful for the Left Legal Fund who took my case on, and helped me reach some sort of resolution with this. And also, I agree with you in full solidarity with what you've just said. If it hadn't been for my family and all those wonderful comrades around me, I would not have survived, to be honest with you. I know it sounds really dramatic to say that, but it really did impact on me in a terrible way. And it felt as if I had been somehow, abused without having done anything. And as I said, I'm still raw now. Just before, it was quite interesting when we were at the preliminary stage, and my details were on the court papers. I had a few days before we were due to go to court. Now, how coincidental is that? I received an email. I believe a few of my other colleagues, comrades in the same court action in the same way received it, to say that we were cleared. And I must read you what the new letters that came from the Labour Party said, which actually was the decider for me to resign from the Labour Party after so many years of service. Having reviewed the evidence in relation to the allegations against you, we have determined that there are no reasonable grounds to find that your conduct is in breach of the Labour Party rules in respect of this investigation. And that was an insult to my intelligence, my integrity, and my humanity. It was an absolute insult because there was no apology. There was no sense that actually they should have reached this decision earlier on, maybe the following day that they sent me the first letter, because it was a single tweet. And so I felt that I could no longer, in all true faith, campaign for a Labour Party to become government. And there was a lot of good councillors and parliamentarians that I have a huge, and GLA members that I still continue to have huge respect for as human beings, but no longer politically. I just couldn't deliver anymore. I couldn't door knock anymore. I couldn't leaflet anymore. I couldn't telephone canvass anymore. And I certainly couldn't go out in the rain and the snow and all those downpours that you have when you're campaigning. And look the electorate in the face and say, trust the Labour Party. I just couldn't. And all it was an apology. That's all it needed.
Well, that's what I was searching for as well. And of course, rather than getting an apology, I got a third suspension just to so I kind of win the High Court case against the party. But they imposed a further suspension. It's absolutely disgraceful behaviour. And the irony is, of course, they're cutting off their nose to spite their face, although we know that they were determined, a section anyway, to prevent a Corbyn-led Labour government coming to power with its socialist agenda at home and its anti-imperialist programme in terms of its foreign policy. And that, I think, was particularly unconscionable to a number of vested interests. And the thing is, though, that the people that have been targeted are the party's best activists, actually. I mean, I like you, absolutely every kind of spare moment was devoted to the Labour Party, pushing out leaflets or writing articles or, going on social media, speaking at meetings. I mean, that was my life. I used to often, I don't compare myself to Nelson Mandela, but, when he said, the struggle is my life, that was me and the Labour Party. And then to be dealt the blow that I was dealt, and I could see that, you feel the same. And I think in many ways we're very similar, Ayfer, in terms of the commitment that we gave to the Labour Party. It really does feel like a real huge kick in the teeth. It's just truly horrible, despicable. And of course, we know that, we're not the only ones that's been affected by this. Many people have been targeted. As I pointed out on this programme on a number of occasions, many of them are themselves Jewish, falsely accused of anti-Semitism. And ironically, many of the accusations against me that were used to justify the suspension of myself was because I'd had the temerity to defend people who were falsely accused, defend anti-Zionist Jewish comrades who'd been falsely accused. People like Jackie Walker, Cyril Chilson, whose parents survived Auschwitz, was accused and expelled from the Labour Party, actually, accused of anti-Semitism and expelled from the Labour Party. People like Tony Greenstein, who's the son of a rabbi whose father was a veteran of the Cable Street battle against Oswald Mosley's fascists. And there are many, many examples like that. And it's a really horrible, despicable chapter, I think, in the Labour Party's history. And I don't know what the historians will make of it, but I'm sure they'll be shocked and ashamed of it. But let me bring Ammar back in, and I'll be interested in your views on this, Ayfer. I know, Ayfer, you've got a council meeting, so you may need to shoot off. Do you need?
Can I just?
Hang on, yes. Go on, Ayfer. Go on.
Just say one thing. It's interesting what you said, and I understand all that, and I sympathise absolutely with that. But no, I don't think anyone is safe. And any one of your listeners listening or watching this, I don't think we can't love ourselves a whole sense of security, thinking that if we do the right thing, say the right words, we're actually safe. Because you're not. Every human being on this planet make mistakes, and they're allowed to make those mistakes. They're allowed to ask questions, and I will defend an individual's right to ask questions until the day I die. But people will make mistakes, and I don't think people realise that anyone can be caught up in this. Anyone. So please support the fight. But thank you very much for your solidarity and your support of my case. It meant a lot to me. Thank you. It gave me some. Thank you.
We're very pleased to support you, Ayfer. Ayfer, do you need to shoot off to your council meeting now, or you do? Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time out to join us this evening. It's a shame you can't wait to hear the reaction from our audience, but we'll perhaps pass on any comments or queries that people might have. If they've got anything specifically to you, and you can deal with them, in your own time then. But thank you for joining us this evening, Ayfer. I really appreciate that. Let me just bring in Ammar then now, if I can, just to carry on the conversation before we bring in our viewers to see what comments and questions they might have. There's been a real, in my opinion anyway, Ammar, I'd just be interested in your take on this, example of breathtaking double standards, I think, by the Labour Party. We've seen them reinstating Trevor Phillips, who was accused of some pretty strong Islamophobic comments. I think he was reinstated even without having to even go before a panel. And quietly, well, there was an attempt to quietly reinstate him. Obviously, there's been a bit of a fallout, certainly on social media anyway, not in the mainstream media, as there would have been had it been, somebody. Well, as we saw when I was reinstated, we saw what the kind of furore that created. But the Labour Party as well. I mean, just in terms of these double standards. So we've kind of got the situation like myself, obviously, but then obviously there's these activists that we are talking about this evening, Ayfer, that we've just heard from. Then you have, on the other hand, people like Trevor Phillips being reinstated. We then see the, I think, fairly blatant Islamophobia that was deployed by the Labour Party in the Batley and Spen by-election. That was my take on it anyway. I'd just be interested in your thoughts about those double standards. And really, I mean, am I going over the top when I say that the party was indulging in a degree of Islamophobia in their Batley and Spen by-election campaign?
Well, I think to say that they were engaging in a degree of Islamophobia would be an understatement, not an overstatement. Right. I mean, yes. I mean, this case has obviously shone a spotlight, I think, on the party's egregious hypocrisy in its response to anti-racism. We already know that it's been a long-standing thing, but I think it's a duplicity that has really become. I think the right word is brazen. Over the last few weeks, as you say, since the Batley and Spen by-election, in which I think Islamophobia was an absolute centerpiece. Just to quickly return to this case, and then to deal with this issue about Trevor Phillips and whatnot. In this case, we saw. Beforehand, we'd seen in October Keir Starmer publicly claiming to support all of the EHRC's recommendations, saying that it will, as I said before, implement them in full and without qualification. But then the party is saying in court that it's basically only going to comply with the strictest, narrowest legal obligations in that report. We heard that they were going to implement a brand new independent disciplinary system, but now they're saying they're only just going to introduce an air of independence to that existing process on a timescale of its own choosing. They sacked Rebecca Long-Bailey, they withdrew the whip from Jeremy Corbyn. Ayfer was making the point that no one's safe. I mean, they those high-profile cases should show people, particularly on the Labour left, that no one is safe. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't even matter if they're the former leader of the Labour Party. They've suspended dozens of party activists over the most minor of allegations, and with manufactured outrage. And then we have the party leadership stoking Islamophobia, as you say, promoting anti-Palestinian racism, and elevating pro-Israel campaigners. And that was obviously signaled with a foghorn, forget about a dog whistle, with the reinstatement of the New Labour darling Trevor Phillips. But Phillips isn't the only, as I said in a piece elsewhere, it's not the only Blairite ghoul to have been resurrected from the shadowy depths. We saw Peter Mandelson, who was of course part of that Islamophobic New Labour regime. And let's not forget as well, it was New Labour that really introduced modern Islamophobia into the UK, whether it was through the securitization, the criminalization of Muslim communities, these wars against Muslim majority countries in West Asia, through promoting US State Department talking points on Muslims. And obviously that was crafted by the neoconservative Bush regime. So Mandelson was implicated in all of that. Mandelson is himself, in my view, an Islamophobe. He's then very close personal friends with Trevor Phillips. He was he was the best man at his first wedding. They've known each other since the student days. They worked together on London weekend television. Actually, as well, when Trevor Phillips was the chair of the EHRC and was facing a number of different scandals, I think 6 commissioners resigned under his watch. He was basically accused of having an sort of a intimidating management style. Even back then, Peter Mandelson was intervening to try to get him a peerage so that he could leave the EHRC and go to a sort of a different job with comparable status in the government. And now I think, obviously it's not been confirmed publicly. I've got nothing to corroborate that, but I think it's highly likely now that we have someone like Peter Mandelson essentially running the Labour Party, that he sorted it out for his mate, Trevor Phillips. He's got him back, as you say, without an independent process, completely flying in the face of everything that Keir Starmer talked about when it came to the EHRC and this independent process and, reforming everything and taking racism seriously. It's more than double standards. It's just total brazen hypocrisy and duplicity. And I think that we need to see Labour Party members, if they're serious about their anti-racism, calling that out. We can't have people sort of walking on eggshells, as we've seen plenty of people do in the Labour Party, saying, oh, well, this isn't really proper. And no, we need to have explicit denunciations of what is happening. This is Islamophobia. And actually as well, it's not just sort of coincidental Islamophobia. That would be the charitable way of looking at it, saying, oh, well, it was just the particular circumstances in Batley and Spare. No, well, it's just the fact that Trevor Phillips is sort of personal friends with Peter Mandelson. Yes, those things, have some degree of influence. But actually, I think this is the Starmer regime directly signaling to its sort of middle-class liberal base, FBPE base, that Islamophobia is back. It's okay to hate Muslims again. And someone made the point before, I forget who it was. I don't want to take credit for coining this, but someone said that Jeremy Corbyn was also a victim of Islamophobia. I think that's absolutely true. Because of his proximity to Muslims, the fact that he didn't treat them with utter disdain, he wrapped an arm around them and, said that he cared about their issues. Because of that, he was smeared as a terrorist sympathizer, Britain hating, a threat to national security. That was the reason why he was essentially treated as sort of a Muslim would be in political life. But obviously, he had a certain, not quite as bad, I think, but, of course, he faced that sort of Islamophobia. And this is Keir Starmer, I think, and the new leadership saying, actually, that's all off the agenda now. Anti-imperialism's gone. We don't care about Muslims. And, we saw in the aftermath of the Batley and Spin by-election a briefing from a Labour source saying that, well, we've created a new electoral coalition. The Muslims abandoned us. We created a new electoral commission without them. So sod them. So they are basically preparing for a realignment of their...
I mean, the two things I think you're saying there, Ammar, clearly there's well, I think, it's brazen, it's disgusting, a political tactic to use Islamophobia for some sort of perverse political gain. And then there's this issue about this kind of double standards, the way the thought policing members in relation to anti-Semitism. the overwhelming majority of it is bogus anti-Semitism, not anti-Semitism at all. It's criticism of the Zionist regime in Israel, whilst turning a blind eye and actually, putting an arm around people who have indulged in pretty egregious Islamophobic tropes. We've heard about Trevor Phillips. You either, in my opinion, as a party, you either have a code of conduct which you apply across the board, or you say, we're a voluntary organization, we're not going to police people's thoughts, only in the most extreme cases. But we have a situation here, don't we, where the party's using Islamophobia, as I've said, for political gain, and turning a blind eye to Islamophobia, and just being completely over the top in relation to any criticism, frankly, of Israel, and claiming that's anti-Semitism, weaponized anti-Semitism. I mean, that's just, it's just untenable, isn't it?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of points there. So, firstly, I would say I absolutely agree in terms of how the party really should be approaching issues in relation to speech. I think we should absolutely have a system in which really we aren't policing people's speech in the way that we have at the moment, which we have. I think it was, I may have the number wrong, but I think there are 8 dedicated Labour Party staff who just deal with complaints. You think about their salaries, how much money the party is putting into running some sort of pound shop version of the Stasi. They're spending millions of pounds really every year to deal just with complaints and policing what members say and do, and then they're not even doing it competently. As Ayfer Orhan very emotively pointed out, she had been under investigation for 2 years for a single tweet that she put out, for which later she was completely exonerated. So, I mean, I would absolutely be in favor of ensuring that free speech is protected. But I think even if there were to be that system, I think people like Trevor Phillips and these other Islamophobes would be caught up in it. I think even if we did have that system, they would have to be expelled for egregious Islamophobia. You can't really compare the things that Trevor Phillips has said with some of these, as you say, these bogus accusations of anti-Semitism, which predominantly relate to criticisms of Israel and of Zionism, which are perfectly legitimate criticisms. We simply can't compare them. This is why I don't really like putting them in the same breath. People talk about, drawing an equivalence between anti-Semitism on the one hand, anti-Semitism allegations, and Islamophobia allegations on the other. But then when we look and we investigate the substance of these allegations, more often than not, the anti-Semitism allegations aren't related to anything else other than someone's particular views of Israel and Zionism. Whereas the views about Muslims are dehumanizing, basically treating them as a fifth column, as a sort of a problem. In the same way, I think that actual anti-Semitism manifested itself in the 1930s in Germany. So you can't compare the two things at all.
And you did the anti-Semitism that people like Tony Greenstein's father, who's been expelled, accused of anti-Semitism, actually confronted that type of anti-Semitism that was personified really by Oswald Mosley's fascists. But anyway, let me move now to Sean, if I may, bring Sean in and just get the views of our viewers this evening to tonight's discussion. Sean.
Hi, Ammar. Hope you're okay.
Hi, Sean.
Yeah, we've got loads of comments and questions that have come through. People are absolutely flabbergasted by Ayfer's story, which is very similar to my story, actually. And I completely sympathise with the way she's been treated and the way she feels. It took me a good 2 to 3 years to get over this. I'm still not over it properly. I ended up losing my job as well because of it. And I also received a letter saying that I was never suspended and that the investigation wouldn't take any action against me. But I still lost my job, and the Times, a Labour Party staffer gave my information to the Times, to a journalist, and he wrote a completely bogus story about me, saying that I had been readmitted to the Labour Party after I'd been expelled, which was completely untrue. So I do feel very, very bitter about that still, that there was no action taken against this member of staff. Anyway, let's go to some questions. and comments. Cool Daddy says, who's going to care about a code of conduct when Labour does what it wants anyway? There needs to be cases against the Labour Party for its institutional racism against blacks and Muslims. Then he goes on to say that the left never had control of Labour. It was always the PLP who ran the party. Sue English says, why would people fight to get back into fake Labour? Have the last few years not taught us just who owns it? And it was never us. Mark Anderson asks, how much are the outstanding legal costs? And I know that costs have been incurred and have been awarded to the Labour Party because of this court action. And hopefully you'll be doing some crowdfunding to try and source that funding to help the people who took the Labour Party to court. Do Chris or Ammar want to tell us a little bit more about that? Are there any other outstanding costs that we can help with?
Yeah, Ammar, do you want to take that?
Yes. So on Monday, the cost hearing took place for the hearing, and the judge, I think wrongly, and the claimants very strongly contested it as well, awarded the Labour Party £110,000 in costs, which obviously is an eye-watering amount that's been awarded to the Labour Party against 8 essentially ordinary people, who don't, who if they are to sort of fork that out themselves, are going to be, I think, left in financial ruin. I mean, any ordinary party member who faced those sort of costs would be. So yes, there are crowdfunding efforts going on to support them, and I think they would very much welcome anyone who supported them, because at the end of the day, if thousands of people took on that burden and demonstrated their solidarity, then actually those costs could be cleared very, very quickly, and the direct impact on individuals, all of those people who donated, would be far fewer than it would on those eight individuals. So if we had thousands rather than 8 people paying it, of course that would be very, very helpful. So you can find their crowdfunder. It's at www.fightingfund.org, and it's on a page called Defend Labour Members. So they're being supported by the Left Legal Fighting Fund. Just repeat that again. So it's www.fightingfund.org. And as I say,
hopefully Gaz will be able to put that up.
Yeah, put that all on the screen, Gaz. Yeah, if you don't mind.
To let people know. That's really important. Tig says the right wing in the Labour in a left wing party is the problem. Right wing running a left wing party into the ground is beyond idiotic. Jonathan Cooper says they treat members like dirt. Susie English says there are people planted in fake Labour to prevent socialism. No socialists should remain in it. I don't know whether that's true or not, Chris. I don't think people are actually planted in Labour Party to prevent socialism. I just think they have a completely different idea to what the Labour Party was founded on.
I think the party's been colonised, Sean, if I'm honest. I mean, Tony Benn used to talk about the party needs 2 wings to fly, a left wing and a right wing. And I think in those days there was a degree of respect for each, if you like, wing of the party. But the advent of Kinnock and then Tony Blair, and again, to quote Tony Benn, he talks about the new Labour cuckoos who are trying to take over the Labour Party. And as I've said on this programme before, they've not just, attempting it, they've absolutely taken it over, smashed all the eggs and destroyed the nest. And so we do have people who are not really in keeping with, I think, the Labour Party's values, certainly not in keeping with the values that were espoused by the likes of Keir Hardie when the party was established. I've got a poster in my office with an extract of Keir Hardie's one of Keir Hardie's speeches, where he's talking about the capitalist class and standing up for the working class. I mean, and these are things that you never hear fall from the lips of Labour parliamentarians anymore. And I think we've seen a situation where the party has been taken over. And I spoke at Jeremy Corbyn's first campaign rally when he was subjected to the coup at Conway Hall, and I referenced an article that I'd written that had been published in the Morning Star, I think the week before, where I'd compared the parliamentarians behind the coup as Linton Crosby sleepers who'd been put into the Labour Party 30, 20, 10 years previous to cause the maximum disruption at this very moment when the Tories were in disarray, when there was a potential of an early election, and there was at that time. This was just after the referendum, let's remember, and we had a socialist as the leader of the party. And I made the point that, frankly, had Linton Crosby done that, I mean, they couldn't have done a better job. These people, whether they are sleepers or, fifth columnists or not, but they are certainly not in keeping with Labour Party traditions, Labour Party values. There's certainly, and maybe I was looking at the Labour Party through rose-tinted spectacles when I joined the Labour Party for many years, but I was always, very proud, I think, of the Labour Party's sort of tradition for standing up for the underdog, for fighting injustice and for fighting for decency and ethical foreign policy. But in reality, we've had people at the very most senior levels of the party who've gone absolutely against that. I mean, particularly people like Blair, Brown to some extent, even Wilson, although he wasn't nowhere near as bad as Blair, but even Wilson, I think, could and indeed should have done more in relation to Britain's response to the Vietnam War, but then also, some of our interventions around the world during those Labour governments, and indeed certainly, that 1945, which everybody holds up as a wonderful example of socialist progress. Its foreign policy, that 45 for 51 Labour government, was appalling. And let's remember as well, it was that government that gave us the atomic bomb. Without even consulting the Labour cabinet at the time. So, yeah, I mean, I certainly think that it's got worse. It's always been a vehicle, I think. It's always been a tool of the establishment, in my opinion. But it's got considerably worse now. And I think we really essentially have got two establishment parties in the same way that they have in the United States now. They're two sides of the same coin. But Ammar, what's your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, regrettably, I think I have to agree to a large extent. I mean, I was a member of the Labour Party for 6 years. I joined much less time than you, Chris. But, I was a member of the Labour Party since the 8th of May, 2015. I joined because I thought, I wasn't particularly enamoured with the state that the Labour Party was in under Ed Miliband, but I thought, look, it represented a genuine alternative to the Tories and that we could build something out of it and that we could get rid of the Tories. But then, my experience over those 6 years, and particularly under Keir Starmer, I just sort of saw that really this party, firstly, isn't democratic, can't be reformed from within. And actually, many of the people in prominent positions have absolutely no interest in making any sort of material change. And so that in combination with sort of the overtly anti-socialist politics, the attacks on, supporters of Palestinian liberation and the Islamophobia in the party, I resigned on the 8th of May 2021, so exactly 6 years after I joined, because I couldn't stand it any longer. And I thought, as you say, it's basically two sides of the same coin. And that's really regrettable because, I think there was really an opportunity, particularly in 2017, to have not just reform the Labour Party and to change its processes and to sort of make it a genuinely democratic party with people in there who represent the views of the members, but it could have actually got into government and it could have done some great things for this country. But now I don't think that sort of position is ever going to come about again. Of course, there are some people who think that actually, yes, there's a left leader waiting in the wings with the name of Angela Rayner, who of course isn't left wing at all, and that somehow the Socialist Campaign Group of the Labour Party, which have proven themselves to be absolutely wet and useless time and time again, are somehow going to rise from the ashes and deliver something better than what came before. I think actually, no, Corbynism was the compromise, as some people have said. It was the final sort of end in the Labour Party for the left. And now that that's been exhausted, not only are they never going to allow that to happen again, and by they, I don't mean some sort of shadowy conspiracy. I mean, the people who are in the Labour Party and who run it are never going to allow that to happen again. I don't think there's a possibility that the Labour Party, under any leader, whether it be Keir Starmer, Andy Burnham, or whoever, actually coming into government and making genuine change. So the question is then, what is the alternative? And, it's certainly not the Labour Party.
No.
Exactly. Totally agree with you. I think we've got time for just one more question.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
So from Daddy Cool says, is there a chance that the Left Legal Fighting Fund or the courts could get the IHRA made illegal, given it only helps Israel?
I think that's one for you, Ammar. with your legal expertise?
I think if there was some way of making the IHRA definition illegal, I think it would have been explored already, and I think that there would already be substantial legal action being taken against it. I don't think that's really possible. I think whenever legal action is taken, I think it needs to be strategic. So whenever legal action is taken by people on the left, because we don't have masses of resources like the right do, who can go to their millionaire and billionaire friends to bankroll them and take on £1 million trials. We can't do that. We have to be strategic in the issues that we want to put before a court. I don't think that can necessarily happen, but I think that politically there is a huge battle to be fought, not just in terms of the IHRA definition, but any sort of attempt to conflate criticism of the state of Israel and Zionism with Israel. This is with anti-Semitism. This is essentially a diplomatic strategy being pursued by the state of Israel, and also, separately by the Zionist movement, to conflate the two issues. And what they want to do, the end goal, and they've already managed to achieve that to a large extent in France and Germany, is to criminalize anti-Zionism in law in Britain. That's what they want to do. That's the end goal. We haven't quite got there yet. So I think, yes, we need to expose that political strategy that's going on. We need to fight against it politically at every opportunity, and raise people's awareness about what the end game is for these individuals. That they don't care about Judeophobia and anti-Jewish prejudice. They're basically pursuing a cynical tactic to support the settler colonial racist state that they so love, and it is brutalizing the Palestinian people. And of course, if there are moves to enshrine it in law, we need to ensure that every single resource is deployed to tackle that, be it lobbying politicians, be it through public campaigns. So yes, we need to ensure that there is awareness about what the IHRA is, and also not just the IHRA, but people have been talking about this Jerusalem Declaration and saying, oh, isn't this such a wonderful alternative to the IHRA? I think in many ways it's worse than the IHRA. Again, it's another definition of anti-Semitism that is talking about Israel and Zionism. Why do we have definitions of anti-Semitism that are talking about Israel and Zionism? They're not relevant, and that needs to be the line that's continuously taken and put forward again and again.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks very much indeed, Ammar, for your insights tonight. They've been absolutely excellent. Thank you very much for that. And just give us one more time that website for people if they want to make a donation to the Fighting Fund. Yes,
it's www.fightingfund.org. I see it's on the screen there. So
great. It's on the screen. I can't see without my glasses properly. Yeah. Nice one. Well, thank you very much indeed again, Ammar, and thank you as well to Ayfer Orhan for her insights. And thank you, everybody, for watching this evening. We'll be back again next week at the same time, 7 p.m. Look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for watching, and good night.